We will go ahead and get started. I think some more folks will be joining us, but this is terrific. Thank you so much. Welcome to the inaugural Spotlight event focusing on student scholarship in gender and communication. I'm Dr. Julie Haynes, and I am the director of the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan. We are an affiliate of the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center at Florida International University. And we are delighted today to have Dr. Copenhagen with us. Many of you have been meeting her at the beginning of our call. Dr. Copenhagen is not only the executive director of the LLK Center at Florida International University, but she is also a 1962 Glassboro State alumna. And we are thrilled to once again mention that she will be the recipient of Rowan's Lifetime Service Award. That event will be on May 20th. And so I would encourage all of you to try to attend that if you can. Professor Brager will put that link in the chat. Again, it's May 20th, I believe, from 10 to 12 a.m., but all that information will be in the link. So we are very thrilled to have Dr. Copenhagen with us virtually today and honor her on May 20th. So thank you for everything that you've been doing for Rowan and the field and for women in communication for many, many years. So we appreciate that. So today's session is the first in a twice yearly series that we will be looking at students' work that discusses issues of gender as it relates to communication. We're really excited that this is our inaugural event. The students you're going to be hearing today are talking about work they did that originated in my Images of Gender in Popular Culture class. As that name suggests, we look at how images of gender are communicated through popular culture. So students look at television shows and music videos, and one of the elements that they look at, or one of the texts they look at, is to explore contemporary advertisements and how they communicate gender. And in this particular assignment, I have the students look at a print ad and not at a commercial. There's several reasons for that. One of them being that I want them to have an image where they might not think they can get a lot out of it by looking at it just first glance, but they actually have to dig deeper and think about what strategies and what kinds of elements are being communicated about gender in that ad. And as you'll see, we have some ads that are pretty fascinating. We have some that just have an image of a person. We have some ads today that just have words on a red screen. So it really is, I think, a helpful exercise in helping them their media literacy, which is part of the core mission of the course. For those of you who are familiar with this area of scholarship, the students look at things like we watch Killing Us Softly by Jean Kilbourne. They read works by Susan Bordeaux on hunger's ideology. They also look at discussions of masculinities in popular culture by people such as Jackson Katz and Wesley Burkle. So again, for those of you who do that kind of research, that should be familiar to you. They really do look at a variety of ads, as I said, and at the root of what they're going to be talking about today is whether or not these ads reinforce dominant ideologies of gender, or which is like hegemonic ideologies is the terminology we use in class, or if they challenge, or if they somehow do both. And I did want to mention that these ads are out in popular culture everywhere, so they're easily consumable, but they do include sometimes graphic sexuality or references to graphic sexuality. The students might be talking about things that might relate to eating disorders or gendered violence. So I just wanted to let everyone know that some of the topics might be sensitive today that you're going to be hearing. So I'm going to introduce each presenter. We're going to hear from each presenter, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. I am going to just talk about the students and their majors really quickly. It would take me, and Dr. Tweedy knows that, as he said, several of these students have been getting scholarship awards earlier this morning. If I were to give all of the accolades of each of these students, we would be here all day. So they really are some just tremendous, tremendous students. And I think the faculty showing up that we have from our department and across the college is also a testament to how much we really think of these students and how excellent they are. So again, if you have questions for the presenters, if you could put those in the chat, and then afterwards we will get to the questions that they have. So our first presenter today is Nadine Elmalem, and she is a senior and she's a senior communication studies major. She has honors concentration and also international studies and Arabic studies minors. As you can see, I'm just doing their majors and minors, and it's like a paragraph. So they're really tremendous students. She's going to be looking at a Moroccan ad that looks at La Prairie butter. Next, we're going to be hearing from Destiny Hall. She's a senior writing arts and English double major. She has a women and gender studies minor, and her ad looks at Miss Dior perfume. And again, all of the students chose their own ads. This was the project where they could choose what they wanted to do. So I think some of them will be telling you sort of why they chose that ad as well. Our third presenter is Jessica Newell. She's a communication studies major, senior communication studies major. She also has an honors concentration and minors in Spanish and women's and gender studies. And her paper looks at a Yoplait yogurt advertisement. And Ian Pierce is a senior communication studies major with a rhetoric and cultural criticism concentration. And his paper examines a Nike ad from its 2020 esports campaign. And I know several people already have posted questions about esports, and we have a program at Rowan in our college about esports. So that would be fascinating to hear from. And our final speaker, because she is a W, we discussed she always has to be last, is Allison Wood. She's a senior communication studies major, women and gender studies minor, and her paper analyzes an advertisement for Magnum brand ice cream. So please help me welcome the speakers. We'll hear from all of the panelists first, as I said, then answer questions. And Nadine, thank you so much for starting us off.
Absolutely. Thank you for introducing me, Dr. Haynes, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm just waiting for you to pull up my ad, just so they know what I'm talking about. Very cool. So to start, I'd like to say that it's really no secret that in many cultures across the world, throughout history, throughout time, it's been maintained that a woman's role, unfortunately, as a daughter, partner, wife, mother, et cetera, pretty much any role, is to provide for her family at home. However, in Western society and media, we often attribute these quote unquote traditional gender constructions as being entirely characteristic of the global South, though I will say we've not ourselves reached total gender equality and egalitarianism. Therefore, I find that in order to form a better understanding of gender construction in media, we must not only consider global perspectives and the experiences of women of color and of non-Western women, but we consider the effects of colonialism and neocolonialism on perceptions of gender roles abroad. That's why I chose to examine a non-Western advertisement in addition to my interests into the experiences of societies in the MENA region and of Arab and Moroccan women in particular. This advertisement is a Moroccan advertisement for La Prairie margarine, and herein traditional gender norms are reinforced. For one, the text translated from French, shout out to my friend Osama for translating that for me because my French is not that good. It in part reads that it's, quote, great to offer to the people who we love the best for their health and prosperity, assumedly by cooking with La Prairie butter. This reflects the assumption that a woman's role is to offer to her loved ones, aka her family, what's good for their health through home-cooked meals, meaning that her domain is strictly within the household and particularly within the kitchen. This is fairly obvious just from looking at the advertisement, but if we look a little bit closer, this ad is far more complicated. For instance, if you look carefully at the image, you'll also see that it encourages Western hegemonic beauty standards in connection to gender performance. Take the woman herself. She certainly appears to be Moroccan, but she's notably younger, she's slender, beautiful, flawless skin, she's got straight hair, perfect teeth, and just the right amount of makeup. She's borrowed much of her appearance from the modern Western tradition and appears to a degree to be whitewashed. She's an idealized example of what a woman should look like, and lacks any semblance to Moroccan tradition or cultural identifiers aside from her complexion. She's therefore made to embody modernity, which is often configured as being characteristic entirely by the West or the global North. Modernity meaning the socio-cultural, economic, and technological norms, often configured also as being at odds with the global South, whose traditions are also unfortunately configured as being backwards or unrefined. This is also something that Jean Kilbourne notes in the documentary Killing Us Softly for, that in advertisements, quote, women of color are generally considered beautiful only if they approximate the white ideal. If they are light-skinned, have straight hair, Caucasian features, etc. And that certainly appears to be the case here. Therefore, the audience viewing this ad are left with the impression that a good wife, mother, daughter, sister, again, etc., is one that both takes care of her loved ones, but one that is staunchly modern, or rather Western in appearance. This assertion of female gender performance being connected with modernity and Western beauty standards is further noticeable if you look at the family behind her. Upon closer look, that man behind her is actually not her partner, but rather her father, because he looks a lot older. You'll also note that he's wearing traditional Moroccan clothes, like a tarbush, which is his fez, and jaleba is the robe he's wearing. I just knocked something over. He's also surrounded by what looks like his grandchildren. He therefore represents an image of Moroccan patriarchy, as in Moroccan culture, the grandfather is typically the primary head patriarch and the elder in the family, and he's paid the utmost respect by his family members. Therefore, again, you can see a juxtaposition of both female and male gender performance, as well as a simultaneous contrast between modernity, which the woman is said to embody through adopting Western modern beauty standards, and by shopping big brand consumer products like La Prairie margarine, and of Moroccan tradition, seen in the grandfather's traditional dress and his established role as the elder male head of the family. And yet again, in spite of her adoption of modernity, the woman in the advertisement nonetheless embodies the traditional role of a woman, mother, daughter, etc. She cooks and serves all the family meals, including, as you'll see in the image, ete, which is Moroccan mint tea, the snacks that the kids are eating, and of course she does so conveniently through tasty products like La Prairie margarine, in order to offer them, quote, the best for their health and prosperity. I'll say that this is also likely the result of Western, particularly French, colonialism / neocolonialism in Morocco. The influences of this almost 50-year colonization are still evident today in Moroccan society in many ways, not just in their beauty and fashion standards, but in many of the social systems that they've since adopted, like school systems, or rather were forced to adopt during colonization, and the fact that their second official language is still French. The negative effects of Western advertising and the promotion of strictly Western gender constructions can be seen globally, not even just in Morocco, as capitalism and consumer culture have become major cultural exports of the West and have again become synonymous with modernity and egalitarianism. This is again something that Jean Kilbourne identifies in Killing Us Softly 4, wherein she argues that, quote, as the media and advertising become global, the American image of ideal beauty is everywhere, transforming cultural difference. So that in modeling commercials and in ads throughout the world, the model is young, thin, white, and usually blonde and blue-eyed, no matter what colors and shapes are the people looking on. Therefore, not only are perceptions of Western consumer culture and advertising, or perpetuations rather, of Western consumer culture and advertising detrimental to the cultures of those to whom it's imposed upon, both through colonial and neocolonial forces, but the pervasiveness of Western beauty standards alongside these factors cause advertisements such as this one to peddle an image of the ideal woman that is especially harmful and disorienting to non-Western viewers abroad. So all in all, La Prairie has become a household name and a feature of many Moroccan kitchens, yet it sells much more than margarine to its consumers. The women in this advertisement, much like the viewers of this advertisement, are caught in this awkward catch-22. They're told that the ideal woman is not only one that fulfills her traditional roles and duties as the endlessly serving, doting daughter, partner, wife, mother, fill in the blanks, who of course does so by, again, shopping the best brand ingredients and therefore reinforces Moroccan patriarchy, but she's also one that has to conform to Western beauty standards and pursue modernity, at least in an aesthetic and consumerist sense. With the detriments of such aggressively Eurocentric advertising on non-Western nations well documented by sociologists and critical media scholars alike, we're both left to wonder as to how Moroccan women today view themselves in light of this walking contradiction presented herein, but we're at least given hope in that today's generation of young Moroccan women are now both defying both of these, particularly by carving out their own meaning of feminism, femininity, and freedom without the influences of Western cultural colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful, fascinating. Again, we will have questions in a few minutes, but we will go to the next slide, which is with Destiny.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to start off and say how honored I am to speak today. I absolutely love the exploration of women's gender studies, so it's such a privilege and honestly such an enjoyment to talk to you guys about this advertisement. So I just wanted to take a second and talk to you guys about why this matters. So the average person looks at 3,000 advertisements per day. That roughly translates to 2 hours of life watching advertisements. Now, this study was taken a long time ago, so this is before social media. So you can only imagine how many advertisements we interact with today. One thing that we learned throughout class is that there's a thing called subliminal messaging. It's basically where you take messages in without knowing it. So without realizing it, we are suddenly foddered to learn about gender, race, class, different things, all through looking at images like this every single day. So the reason why I picked this advertisement is because I honestly saw nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's a little risque, but all in all, I didn't look at it and think, wow, this is sexist. So I was really personally invested in figuring out what this advertisement was saying about gender and what I was missing by just initially looking at this passively. So the first thing that I did to kind of construct this image of gender and what this advertisement is trying to say is looking at Natalie Portman herself. And obviously, she is absolutely gorgeous. And that's not a problem. However, she does represent a Eurocentric beauty standard. Eurocentric as in white, pretty, thin, that sort of thing. She is hairless body-wise, she has very long hair, a very gorgeous woman. Again, it doesn't matter that Portman herself is beautiful, it matters that she represents this beauty ideal. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I decided to look at the phrase, and you, what would you do for love? And initially I was like, who is she talking to? Is she talking to me? Is she talking to Portman? What does this mean? And I came up to two possibilities. So the first, of course, is, and you, as in me, the viewer, the audience, what would I do for love? I'd look like Portman. Part of advertisement is selling people things. And what I realized is that they're selling perfume, but they're also selling Portman as her identity as a beautiful woman. So what I would do for love is try to look like Portman. But of course, Portman herself doesn't look like Natalie in this picture. Obviously, there's been Photoshop, there's been touch-up filters. So if Portman herself doesn't look like Portman in this advertisement, how can I, an average person? Well, you can't. I'm supposed to invest money, and that's what I would do for love. And even though I can't look like Portman, I can sure smell like her using the Miss Dior perfume. So that's what I realized was the first meaning. The second meaning was, of course, sexuality. Portman is nearly naked on the floor with her blanket. And I realized that this image is trying to sell us an argument about sexuality. It's Miss Dior and not Mrs. Dior. So I want to break down the differences between those lines. Miss Dior is available. She may be dating someone, but she's not tied down to them. She owns her own sexuality and she does as she pleases with it. Miss Dior is empowering, whereas, and of course I don't believe this, but Mrs. Dior is married. She's frumpy. She doesn't have sexuality. There's a difference between this. Of course, that's not what I believe, but it's what the advertisement is selling. Miss Dior, fun, sexuality free, that sort of thing. But as we look deeper into the ad, I realized that nobody except for men in this advertisement owns their sexuality. And you, what would you do for love? In this case is you show your love through your expression of sexuality. Now, of course, this isn't a good message to have. Consent is an enthusiastic and informed and excited yes. It's not, well, if you love me, you would do this. And I thought to myself, well, that's a very dangerous message. And I realized that who asked that? It's the man behind the camera. A man behind the camera is asking Portman, what would you do for love? And we see how Portman responds. But he also is asking us, the viewer, what would we do for love? Well, metaphorically, we're supposed to align ourselves with Portman. We're supposed to express our love through sexuality, which is problematic. However, I realized that it's even more problematic when I consider that Portman is coded to look like a child. Obviously, Portman is not a child. Coding is when someone symbolically is supposed to look like or is supposed to intimidate the nature of. And I'll break this down. So if you look in the background, there is a white, pure background. She's sitting on a white, pure floor, and there's angelic, almost lighting pouring down on Portman. It's very pure, white, virginal. And then I realized that Portman, clutching the perfume, it has a blanket on her. I was looking at this blanket and I thought, okay, well, I'm an adult woman. Would I buy this blanket? No, it's a little bit too young for me. And I'm not very far removed from being a teenager. So I thought, as a teenage girl, would I buy this blanket? It's still a little too young for me. And I realized that this blanket is not a blanket at all. It's more of a blankie. It looks like a child's blanket. So again, she's being coded as a child. Again, Miss Dior, young, youthful. And then I noticed that the perfume bottle itself, there's a cute little bow and it's bubblegum pink. The more that I look at this advertisement, it's not womanly, it's almost childlike, which is very insidious because it's asking young girls, what would you do for love? And again, we know the answer to this, you express your sexuality. So it's a very dangerous message. And honestly, I was a little horrified that looking at this advertisement, I didn't realize this at all. So I think it's just very important that we look at advertisements and we consider, what is this trying to say about gender? Because even though this is a perfume advertisement, it's way more than that. It's selling this notion that young girls should use their sexuality to show that they love someone, which is horrifying. And I just don't think selling perfume is worth it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Destiny. I think you can tell already why I was so impressed with these students and their papers. So thank you again. Next, we will hear from Jessica Newell.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see many familiar faces in the audience today, and thank you for coming out to support us. So I chose this Yoplait Yogurt ad, specifically their new line, which they've called We. It's all very French-themed marketing. I was drawn to this ad because it just looks like a cute little scene. It doesn't really appear blatantly sexist or crude. And honestly, after this semester, so many of these really gendered advertisements are kind of gross, but this one is just a little proposal on top of a probiotic snack. So what is there to that? Well, if I have learned anything from Dr. Haynes' class and some of my other communication and gender studies courses, I've learned that if you sit with something long enough, the hidden meanings can just unravel and you'll find them. So that's really what I chose to do with this paper. And I looked into those deeper meanings. And what I found is that while some elements of the ad, like the portrayal of a somewhat feminine man, appear to break with traditional norms, ultimately, this advertisement reinforces depictions of femininity as it relates to a woman's relationship with food and love. So before I get into those two main points of analysis, I want to assert what I see as the audience of this advertisement, which I do think is women. There's a few factors for this. I see that the ad commands you to fall in love with this ice cream. And it's clear that the subject who's supposed to be falling in love with this ad is a woman. The packaging of the yogurt is also very traditionally feminine. It's floral prints, it's soft hues. And I think it's important to contextualize where I found this advertisement. It was in a Good Housekeeping magazine. And even though we've come a long way in society, women are still predominantly running the domestic sphere. This was next to some women's clothing advertisements and some recipes. So I think definitely geared towards a female audience. So with that in mind, the first main angle I took was to examine the relationship with food. So some of our researchers in our courses, like Susan Bordeaux, discussed that women are trained to have a cool relationship with food. Now by this, they mean that we are supposed to be nonchalant, eat delicately, not too quickly, not sloppy, and definitely not too much. Women are taught to watch our figures, slim down. On the other hand, men are trained to have a big appetite, to bulk up, get some meat on their bones. So even from a young age, we're conditioned really differently regarding our relationships with food. So I looked at the spoon containing the product in this advertisement and saw that it's untouched. Now, I would think if I were trying to sell food, I would probably take a little bite out of it for the ad, right? Because if it's so good, maybe we can't wait to eat it. But no, it's just perfectly untouched on the spoon. Not even the woman in the advertisement is eating. So what I saw this as signifying is that we're supposed to look at the food. We're supposed to want it. but we're not supposed to devour it. That's crossing the line. That's transgressing our cool relationship with food. In that same vein, at the bottom, it says, tastes like 5 ounces of France. And this is in pretty big font. And I was also drawn to the fact that this is a number. And when it comes to food, we're pretty numbers obsessed. If you think about it, people count their calories and they're definitely really concerned with what they see on the scale. So numbers really tie into food. And this inclusion of the taste like 5 ounces of France makes it seem like this product is really easy to manage what you're eating. It's really easy to kind of track yourself. It's just a light snack. And maybe this wouldn't be so problematic if we didn't use numbers and especially units differently when we market food to men. For example, hamburgers, classic meaty manly food, right? Sometimes on menus, they don't even say hamburgers. They're sold as quarter pounders. We've all seen that, right? So a quarter pound mathematically is actually 4 ounces, about a 4-ounce patty. That's less than this 5-ounce cup of yogurt. But because hamburgers are marketed to men and men want to be meaty and bulk up, we make the units go up. And because women do not want to hear pounds, because we don't want to add more pounds, we market the ounces. So that's kind of some interesting things at play regarding the relationship with food. And then switching gears, a lot of our research, again with Bordeaux and also with Jean Kilbourne, discuss that women have kind of a love relationship with food. So there's an analogy in this ad between eating the yogurt and falling in love. And a lot of our research has said that women seek kind of sensual pleasure from eating, as well as emotional fulfillment. I mean, we all love like our Ben and Jerry's when we're sad, right? I know that I definitely do. So there's some truth to it, but they really took it far. They were kind of obvious too. They went right for France. You know, we have these cultural associations as Paris as being the city of love. So they're definitely using that as a device to push that message. So when I was looking at this scene, I did look at the man proposing to the woman and I thought, all right, well, you know, he looks a little more effeminate. He's not particularly chiseled, muscular, hairy, which we kind of see a little bit more across ads. And I thought, so maybe that's kind of progressive, right? And then in class, we learned about metrosexuality. So that talks about men who are well-groomed and may appear more feminine. But ultimately, what we learned from this is that metrosexual men are still going for the girl a lot of the times. They're still straight. They're going for that heterosexual conquest, a lot of the researchers called it. So while they appear more feminine, they're still really participating in heteronormativity, which is one of the dominant structures in our society. So it's maybe not as progressive as it seems. He is definitely wanting the woman to fulfill her role in this transaction and say we and say yes, which I think is where the name really comes in. And I think it's interesting too that Yoplait has so much brand recognition. If I said Yoplait, I feel like pretty much everyone on this call understands that that's yogurt, but they made that really, really tiny and chose to put we really big. And so from this, I also think not only is it providing the woman in the ad script to say yes, you know, to fulfill the proposal, because it's what we all want, right? We don't want to see people say no to the proposal. It's awkward. But I think it's also at the same time, there's this parallel narrative going on where not only is she supposed to say yes to him, but Yoplait is courting us, the viewer. They want us to see their yogurt, to want it, and to say, I will go buy your yogurt. So somehow, we, the viewer, are tied into this whole romantic narrative in this ad that should have nothing to do with lust and romance, but yet has everything to do with that romance. So to conclude, while this ad may seem progressive in some ways, different portrayals of men than we're used to seeing, also an interracial couple, which could be a whole different paper, it still is really pushing a heteronormative script for romance. And it is also reinforcing the traditional idea that women should crave the food, but don't devour it, restrict ourselves in the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Okay, next we'll hear from Ian. Trying to get the, hang on a second, Ian, my PowerPoint won't.
All good.
There we go.
So before I begin, I'd just like to say that I'm very proud to speak here today. I see that some of you are already familiar with me and my work, and for those of you who are not yet, you're welcome in advance. So to begin here, at first glance, Nike workout apparel is technically the product this ad is selling, but I contend that it's also selling esports itself. If the public does not buy into esports, referring to a rhetorical investment, Nike will not be able to sell their clothes worn by this model, therefore both are essentially the product. This is relevant in that Nike here is helping reconstruct the meaning of sport, which aids in the construction of man, which is where my research and argumentation is centered. Esports, and by extension this Nike advertisement, challenge the notion of sport head-on, challenging the need for its players to engage in semi-violence, despite the explicit violence being depicted on screen within these games. Some ideas central to the piece by Jackson Katz used in this paper are that of strength and control. In essence, Katz argues that because of the stresses of capitalism on an archetypal working man, men, by means of a sense of losing control over their lives due to the untouchable superiority of their bosses, regain their sense of control by enacting that control upon their body, i.e., developing physical fitness. Based on this idea, I argue that this advertisement strikes directly at this desire, hoping to identify with the average male and their pursuit of physical fitness, enticing them to see themselves, as well as that masculinized desire to be fit, within this ad and within esports in general. To that effect, Katz also delves into how a physically fit male body represents an implicit violence. This is to say that a fit male body poses the threat of possible violence at any time, feeding into the male fantasy of control. Building on this position, I argue that the desire for violence and control is part of the allure of sport for men in the first place, and further, that connection between the two is one of the main selling points of this advertisement. Lastly, I discussed the construction of gender through ads such as these. Katz describes how, quote, advertising that targets young white males has the difficult task of stressing gender difference in an era characterized by loosening of gender distinctions. This requires constantly reasserting what is masculine and what is feminine. In addition to reconstructing gender in terms of individuals, I argue that advertisements such as these also aid in the reconstruction of gender in terms of sports themselves. I talk about male and female coded sports and how this notion intersects with violence, or lack thereof, and control as well. In conclusion, this advertisement takes integral qualities of masculinity and turns them on their head, all while assuring that no such work is taking place. And yet, it reinforces notions of gender and masculinity by constructing new ones and juxtaposing old ones against these new constructions. This ad informs what manly even is, and assures that each man is manly insofar as anything they do can be constructed as manly. And this marks the end of my presentation. I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ian. Excellent. All right. And then next we'll hear from Allison Wood. Go ahead, Allison.
All right. Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you again. Thank you to Dr. Haynes for all the work and the time that she invests into her students. It means so much more than she'll ever realize. And I can't thank her enough for the things that she's taught me as well as my classmates. So I also want to thank everyone for being here in support of myself as well as my classmates as we dive into this scholarship that we have picked apart for the past semester. So the reason why I chose this ad is because of its simplicity. So when you see the ad, you only see words and a bright red background. And so for me, when I saw this, I thought to myself, this is a non-traditional style advertisement that typically I feel students would shy away from because it doesn't have any people or objects present in the advertisement. And so for me, I saw that as a challenge, and it made me excited to dive deep into this advertisement and analyze the depictions of the hegemony that is present. And as well, this advertisement uses sex and sexuality in an attempt to sell the product, which is something that we have talked about and read about extensively in class. And so ultimately, I found that this advertisement reinforced and defied both hegemonic masculinity as well as hegemonic femininity. So diving into who this advertisement is geared toward, it is safe to say that it is geared towards women. as we have learned about in our scholarship studying Susan Bordeaux, whose work contributes to feminist, cultural, and gender studies. Her scholarship, Hunger as Ideology, which Dr. Haynes mentioned earlier, she states, emotional heights, intensity, love, and thrills. It is women who habitually seek such experiences from food and who are most likely to be overwhelmed by their relationships to food, to find it dangerous and frightening, especially rich, fattening, soothing food like ice cream. And so that's very clear here, as we are quite literally mentioning ice cream in this advertisement. So we do know that that rings true, that this advertisement is indeed geared towards women. Now, the name Magnum itself carries a masculine connotation, as the word is generally associated to a popular brand of condoms, as well as ammunition that is used for guns. And so this is relating to Jackson Katz in that masculinity is related to that of violence, and not that masculinity is violence, but it is violence is typically gendered as something that is masculine. And so, as I stated, that the name in itself of this brand definitely comes across as masculine. Secondly, I stated that colors have the ability to invoke emotions and feelings, so much so that they can alter moods and temperament. The color red has often been associated with sex, promiscuity, and love. So for example, Valentine's Day is nationally recognized as a day to celebrate love and interpersonal relationships. Oftentimes, we see red hearts that are adorned on cards and red roses that are exchanged as a token of love on this holiday. Because the holiday is recognized as a day of love, most people expect to engage in some sort of sexual relations with their partners on this holiday. And so the color red, as seen in this particular advertisement, is meant to invoke feelings of love and sex, which ultimately reinforces hegemonic gender ideals pertaining to both masculinity and femininity. Moving on to the second point that I made in my scholarship, is that this advertisement makes a really bold statement in comparing ice cream to sex. And so essentially, the advertisement is stating that ice cream is in fact better than sex and will provide more satisfaction than physical pleasure. The comparison between sex and ice cream ultimately defies hegemonic masculinity, as it denounces the physical pleasure given by men and suggests that their ability to perform sexually is below that of something that can be purchased at a store. So thereby, linking an orgasm to food consumption, hegemonic gender ideals of masculinity are defied. At the bottom of my advertisement, you can see the statement, and you can start over as soon as you finish. This statement displayed at the bottom of the advertisement is making a statement about the refractory period that men experience sexually. As we know, after climaxing, men experience a refractory period where they're not able to perform again sexually for a duration of time. This phrase defies hegemonic masculinity, as it makes a mockery of something that ultimately men cannot control. And a statement of the likes of this can cause insecurity within men, as if they could never compare to ice cream because of their refractory period. Furthermore, this statement emasculates men by insinuating that men are not needed to supply pleasure, and the pleasure that they do deliver does not compare to the pleasure given from consuming an ice cream. Again, this statement is appealing to women because they are told that they can start over as soon as they finish eating their ice cream and experience that pleasure all over again. Because of the refractory period, the woman has to wait to receive her pleasure. This statement raises the question in women's minds of why they would even bother with sex when ice cream is easily attainable and they can continue to receive pleasure from it as much as they want. And so by analyzing this advertisement, we realize that this advertisement is indeed geared towards women, and it makes a shot towards men in order to sell their product. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Allison. Really great job, everyone. Let me stop sharing for a second. Thank you again to all of our students. I think you could see why I wanted to showcase them. Really phenomenal job. I taught 2 sections of images of gender and pop culture this semester. The students are from both sections. And as I told them, highlight of my pandemic, remote sessions with them were intellectually stimulating, really, really wonderful. So a couple of things before we get to the questions. I did want to emphasize, and I think it's clear, but it may not be, that the students are really looking at how gender is communicated and not any kind of essentialist qualities. So when the students are talking about masculinity associated with violence, as you heard them just say, it is what is communicated through the culture, not something inherent. So that is certainly something important to recognize. And the second issue is that we really emphasize the polysemic nature of texts in the class, of the advertisements or music videos or whatever we're analyzing. So someone might look at one of the advertisements and have a completely different interpretation. In fact, I'm reading their final exams now, and it's fascinating. I give them like a music video to analyze, and it's fascinating to see all the different interpretations. So I think that's important for the students to know how to support their argument, make a claim, support it. As I tell them, 10 years from now, they may not be having to analyze an ad for their supervisors, but they will be seeing ads every day. And certainly those critical thinking skills are very important. So we do want to get to questions. We have quite a few of them. And I think there's a recurring theme, which is fascinating, about whether we see advertisements changing. And I did want to mention too that the Kilbourne and Bordeaux and Katz, and you hear these people being discussed throughout, those are foundational readings. As I tell them, they've been written sometimes a decade ago. And so the advertisements that I told them, I let them choose whichever advertisements they wanted, but they had to be within the last 3 years, because I did want the students to see it's part of the media literacy, of course, but also to see, have things changed. So let the students answer that, any of the students that want to, about whether you see the ads changing or not.
I would say, sorry. I would say for mine, with just regards to Moroccan advertisements, it's been a while since I've watched like Moroccan TV, yes, but I know like a lot of the ones that are aimed towards women, like for laundry detergent or cooking products like butter, definitely women are always depicted as like, again, being kind of Eurocentric, beautiful and young, but they're always with like their kids and their families because you're buying soap and butter. So like, obviously you're going to use that to support your family is the message they're trying to send. One thing I did mention at the end of my presentation that I really feel like stands true is that like the younger generation in Morocco, particularly like the youth culture, they're very much like carving out their own definition of like freedom and egalitarianism and feminism and equality, but they're also not doing it with this like Western model. Like they're adopting all of these great things, but they're not doing it by just copying what's going on in the West, because they're two different cultures. And it shouldn't be that like Western culture is imposed on a different place in the world and it's called like bringing equality to a place, because that's just not quite it. So I would say advertisements that are geared towards older people are kind of in that same realm, but definitely with the youth culture taking over and just how they're changing the way they view themselves and how they view their society, and they're doing it in this uniquely like Arab way, but while still being like egalitarian, that's definitely changing a lot too. And that's more something you would see like in music and fashion.
Thanks, Nadine. We'll do Allison and then Destiny. I feel like I'm in class. Class is so exciting because people line up to have comments and I love it. So Allison, and then after Allison, Destiny, you can hop in.
Sure. So pertaining to the question of whether we see these advertisements changing or not, what we do know from studying this is that there is one thing that has sold time and time again, and that is sex. Sex sells in our society. And that is something that we see in a lot of advertisements, actually predominantly. And so I feel as though these companies rely on sex to sell their products because they know that it sells. And so I think that what's important to remember is that when we do see advertisements that don't reference sex or sexuality or this type of intimacy referencing their product, it's something that should be substantial in the mind of the consumer, because we realize here that this company clearly has something to offer to the consumer that doesn't revolve around sex and sexuality. And so that's really important to remember when we're thinking about these different types of advertisements that these brands try to sell to us, because in the documentary that we watched, Dreamworlds 3, so Jali said that it's the easiest thing to do. It's something that people rely on, or these producers rely on, when they don't have really anything else to say about it. And so it's the easiest fallback that they have to rely on. So like I said, when we see advertisements that don't revolve around sex and sexuality, it's something that the consumer should really take note of when considering, supporting this company and buying that product.
I just want to add, in the terms of Eurocentric beauty, there are advertisements that we see where there are people who aren't, everybody's beautiful, but defined as traditionally beautiful, or within this Eurocentric beauty. The one thing that I want to advocate for is that there's a difference between visibility, where we see someone of a certain, that they look some type of way, versus representation. One thing that I've been seeing a lot lately is performative activism, where brands will say, oh, well, we are facing a racial crisis in America, so we'll just throw in a few models and there we go, diversity, instead of having this constant stream of diverse modelage. I believe that there is a shift, but I'm very excited for the time where it's normal instead of something that is a political statement, especially because these advertisements should represent the different people that will be buying this product. I'm honestly over just seeing the same model advertising everything. We should have more diversity. And I'm really excited for when it's not a political, this is our stance, we all belong, but we don't really in these advertisements. So I don't really see a substantial change.
Excellent. Jessica or Ian, did you want to add to that?
I'll add to it, sure. However, I suppose in my field, when I'm talking about esports and just like, I suppose, gaming in general, I feel like the dominant observation is that masculinity is slow to change. And in something so entrenched in masculinity, I'm just a bit pessimistic that any change will actually come to fruition, as I feel that gender is a very central part of the discussion in terms of that sort of entertainment. So I'm just a bit unsure as to whether or not long-term change is visible or whether it's far away, but I believe steps are being made every day, so it's hard to say.
I think that's a really great question. And Jessica, before I move on, did you have any, did they pretty much say what you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely reiterating what everybody else said. I was thinking that some companies are making strides. I know that Aerie in particular is really working on portraying like different types of beautiful bodies for women. Like if you look at bathing suits, you're seeing all types of things. But then, as was already mentioned, like, yeah, sex sells, and some people are just kind of pasting a partially naked woman on something and saying buy our product. So it's not everyone. It's not a mass shift forward.
I do think, as the professor of the class, and I've been teaching this class for 20 years, a long time. And I think one of the things that I notice when the students do their papers is how surprisingly things have not changed, even in the era, somebody said the Me Too movement, that it is subtler sometimes, but it's not quite. I want to get back to Ian's question because we had a question beforehand, and I wanted to give also a shout out to a couple of the people who are in attendance today who are our past speakers. We have Marissa Bell Munoz, who is the Vice President for Communication for Major League Soccer. So I see that she's on the call. Thank you for being here. And also Gail Dent. Gail Dent is the Vice President of Communications for the NCAA. And so Ms. Dent had a question about the esports, because I know there's, this really kind of, I want to say strange, that's not really right, but this odd relationship between sports and esports. And I think Dr. Tweedy has said before, he's like, what is it? Esports is to sports as acorn is to corn, or some kind of funny thing he has about that. So there's this relationship with sports and esports. And so Ms. Dent was asking about, and I think you're getting at it, Ian, about sort of this idea that video games and gaming is masculine and perhaps even hegemonically so or toxically so. There's a lot of discuss about gender violence. Do you think that do you think that the ad is playing into that kind of masculinity by having that into the game culture?
Oh, absolutely. Because I forgot to add that I feel like gaming as a sport exists in a very odd superposition between too masculine to be feminine and too feminine to be masculine enough to be sport. Because the whole concept challenges the idea of sport, and yet video games have been coded as nauseatingly masculine since companies were forced to put video games on the male section of toy aisles in, I believe, the 80s or 90s. So it's in this very toxic position where it's largely untouchable by women in terms of the community that plays games as well as the advertising around games. Yet it's not physically violent enough, as I was hoping to try to get at with the Katzian analysis, to be like a real sport. Talk about like male coded sports and feminine coded sports. It's this absolutely perplexing hierarchy of like the tightrope walking between being a real sport, but not being masculine enough to be like a realer sport, but being too feminine, too masculine all at the same time. It's so confusing to even try to conceptualize in a concise way that I'm even having trouble on it after having written the paper, if that answers your question.
It's really fascinating. And we've talked before too about sort of the ad itself playing into geek culture by representations of the body type and the nationality, race of the model as well. So I think it's a really important point to point out sort of that betwixt in between of masculinity and sort of asserting itself into that area. Wonderful. Let's see what other questions we had. I know, Gail, you're muted and not on, but if that wasn't your entire question, you want to add a follow-up, let me know as well.
No, that was it. Yeah, thank you very much, and great job by all of the students. Yeah.
Thank you, Gail. Sorry to put you on the spot, but you could take that back to the NCAA too, because she was asking about this sort of, masculinity. And
I certainly will. We have tabled esports right now, so it's still on the agenda for discussion at some point. But yeah, we're looking at a number of different perspectives. So this was good today.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thank you again for coming. And I had another question. I want to try to get to everybody. But what surprised you the most when you were doing your analysis? I think someone had asked that earlier in the chat. Or have you already said that?
I could jump in. So I know that when I'd first written my draft of this paper, I sent it to you, Dr. Haynes, and I was like, what do you think? And you were like, good. You can always dig deeper though, which is very good advice. So I was like looking at it with my mom and I was like, what do you think? And she was like, well, that man behind her is not her husband. That's her dad. And I was like, really? But upon closer examination, like the assumption would be that that's like her husband and her kids. But upon closer examination, like that's her dad, which is interesting that they're not showing like a husband, but rather a dad, because that just kind of has all different kinds of connotations, again, with regards to patriarchy and being like the ultimate patriarch, more so than like a father or a husband, a grandfather. So that really surprised me. And just in general, like something as one might consider to be mundane as like a brand of margarine. Like I remember sending this ad to my friends and being like, can you help me with the French? And they were like, why are you looking at Moroccan butter? I was like, it's important, it's for school. It's just really interesting how things that you might consider to be mundane or fairly innocuous can really reveal a lot about what companies are trying to sell you as the truth or as representative of a good person, good mother, etc. And B, how much you can dig deeper and how much doing so can reveal about something.
Excellent, thank you. And I did want to mention with yours too, because we talked about it. And obviously there are age differentials between men. You know, it's culturally acceptable for a man to be 20 years older than the wife. But I think the way in which the body of the person, the traditional culture that you said, is coded, if you will, and that ad sort of really supports your point. So it's excellent. Other speakers, what else did you find surprising when you were doing your work?
I think for me personally, I was very shocked that I didn't get it initially. I've been part of the Women in Gender Studies program, I want to say for 2, maybe 3 years now. And it was very interesting that I just didn't get it automatically. Again, I talked about subliminal advertising and how we're getting this messages about gender without knowing it. And not to say that I was cocky, because I certainly wasn't, but I thought that I was this person who was immune to these gender ideals. But when I first saw the advertisement, I was like, oh, nothing's wrong here. She's just selling a bottle of perfume. So it was very alarming and very humbling to realize that I didn't understand how honestly horrible this advertisement was until I had to dig deep into it. And it just made me realize that I need to be careful when I'm looking at different advertisements, because who knows what other messages I'm sinking in every single day.
Great, go ahead, Allison. Thank you, Destiny. It really is, I mean, like I said before, I've been teaching, you know, this a long time. Won't date myself, but a long, long time. And students will write things in their ad and I'll be like, oh, wow, I never thought of that. Some excellent perceptive point. Go ahead, Allison, thanks.
Sure. So what was most surprising to me about my advertisement is that in light of our society, who typically glorifies masculinity over femininity, I was really surprised at the fact that my advertisement was, like I said, had stated before, is like typically it's making a mockery of masculinity in this advertisement. And so that's something that typically isn't seen in our society. It's something that can be done to femininity. They'll make a joke about femininity, and that's more so accepted in society. But to make a shot or a crack at masculinity in a society that, you know, pretty much is, you know, aligns with the patriarch, it was very surprising to me. And so even though I'm not saying that, you know, this brand by Magnum is like the best thing since sliced bread, I don't think it is. I don't think it's good to make generalizations about any type of gender or identity. But I did think that it was surprising in that way, that it was making a shot at masculinity rather than what we normally see as towards femininity.
Excellent. Yes, we talk about this notion of symbolic inversion, which is just flipping binaries, right? So that, you know, it often works with the use of humor, but it doesn't get to the questions of power in general. So I think that's really excellent observation. Jessica or Ian, did you have any? Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, so I was surprised that the literature on all these problematic elements in advertising, it's not new. It's also abundant, yet it's not necessarily getting better all the time. Like, we are fully aware of these problematic elements. You know, just from your class, we were restricted to what we had been reading for you. And just in those, I don't know, 8 or 9 scholarly sources or whatever, I found all these connections to my ad. You know, I didn't even have to dig through the internet deeply or anything. So just from that, we already knew. So I guess I get disappointed when we have all these amazing thoughts and we realize things, and then we don't have change to follow up those discoveries, I guess.
Really good observation. Really excellent observation. I find myself all the time saying, we study these things. Like, people will be like, politicians are so, but there's a whole college of communication and creative arts. We all are useful and could help people, but no one asks us. But and Ian, yeah, what did you find surprising in yours?
I was more so surprised with just the decision in general, because it's very odd to see the juxtaposition of those two groups of people, because just in the visual construction of the ad, you have a person hunched over and like leering at like a gaming setup, which is in a gym. Side note, the machine that he's like changed to, you're not supposed to do that. You're just supposed to pull on the bar. So I thought that was a very odd choice. But just in general, just taking the imagery of these two groups that don't really intersect and then taking their imagery and combining them. However, for Nike's sake, if I was on the PR team, I would be worried about, is there too much gaming for the gym goers that just want a Nike tank and shorts? And is there too much Nike tank and shorts for people who just want to watch esports?
Excellent, excellent observations. Already it's 1:30. I can't believe we've already hit the hour mark. I would invite you to stay on. I'm going to finish this out here, but if you would like to stay on and talk with the students and ask more questions, we are happy for you to do so. I want to thank everyone for spending this hour with us. It's May 7th, final exams day. We had over 50 people on the call for this time of year is phenomenal. So thank you all for your support all semester long for the programming we've had with the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication. I really appreciate all the support. Certainly thankful for Dr. Tweedy's support, our speakers who are here today, and especially, of course, Dr. Copenhaver, where the genesis of all of this came from. So please join us on May 20th for her event as well. Thank you to the students. Without you, none of this would matter. This is why we do what we do. And so to spotlight you in this way is a true privilege. So thank you very much for that. I do want to thank Karen Brager as well for always being my right-hand person with doing all of the event planning. So again, thank you so much for the students. If you're not on campus now or you're taking the summer break, have a lovely summer, stay safe. Again, we'll stay on here with any questions that you might have for the speakers, but otherwise have a wonderful day, wonderful summer, and thank you so much for your support.